One Kenya Alliance, Senator Wetangula, and a standing member of the committee to second the motion. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, I remind the distinguished senator for Kirinyaga that I'm not one senator, I am this senator. Yes. I'll give him a few tutorials on good English. Mr. Speaker, I beg to second this motion ably moved by my chairman of the Committee on Finance and Budget. Mr. Speaker, the budget policy statement is a fundamental constitutional requirement and requirement in law that the Treasury must tell the country through Parliament its intention to roll out a budget that is realistic, a budget that helps this country to achieve its growth targets. So members must be very keen to ensure that the budget policy statement that Parliament will eventually approve becomes the pillar from which budgets will grow, and any deviation and variation in substantial terms from the BPS becomes illegal and unconstitutional. So it is a very, very important document that this House must be called upon to not only read and internalize, but to debate and approve from a point of reason, not emotion. Mr. Speaker, as a House that is obligated to protect counties, their interests and their governments, this budget policy statement falls short of our expectations. For what reason, Mr. Speaker? The minister tells the country that the economy has grown by an admirable figure of 9.2%. This is the budget he's bringing, that we have a 9.2% growth. But, Mr. Speaker, this House must be invited to ask questions. Why, where there is a 9.2% growth, the allocation to counties remains static? 370 billion that we allocated in the ending financial year is what is being proposed again. And in this regard, Mr. Speaker, the Senate must take a very dim view of a body called IBEC, in which governors go sit there, compromise the interests of their counties, compromise the views of the Senate, although they don't bind us. But, Mr. Speaker, at the end of the day, sometimes it's very difficult for you to wail louder than the bereaved. Because, Mr. Speaker, the chairman of COB and his team, and regrettably even CRA, have been part of this connivance to go and sit and agree that, yes, we have a 9.2% growth, but that growth will only benefit the national government. The county governments will remain as are where they were. This is not acceptable, Mr. Speaker. And I want to urge members of this House to defend the interests of the counties they represent. Whether you are elected or nominated, you are part of a delegation from your county to ensure that the interest of your county is not about which senator was elected, but about you, the senator in this House, that represents those interests. And the committee has recommended, Mr. Speaker, that we reject the figure of 370, as my able chair has pointed out, and we are recommending a figure that is commensurate with the growth that the Treasury itself has told us. That growth, Mr. Speaker, is not a figure from the Senate, it's a figure from the Minister for Finance. And based on that figure, Mr. Speaker, the committee recommends to this House that the allocation of revenue for the financial year that is now rolling out must move from 370 to 495 billion. That reflects the growth that the Treasury itself has told us. We probably should be asking for more, but we are only holding them to account on what they have brought to the Senate. And my chairman has said it very clearly. And for we senators, our interest is to ensure that devolution works, that resources follow functions. And the functions that are already with the county governments must be adequately resourced. Equally important, Mr. Speaker, in our recommendation is the continuing holding on resources for devolved functions. Huge sums of money are still held at the Ministry of Water and Irrigation. Huge sums of money are still being held at the Ministry of Health. Huge sums of money are still being held at the Ministry of Agriculture for functions that have been devolved. Agricultural fertilizer subsidies are now dead because the money that would help counties do the subsidies is held at the headquarters. We only, Mr. Speaker, need to inquire as a Senate, which functions do we devolve according to the Constitution and the law to the counties? And which ministries are therefore obligated under the Constitution to be responsible for policy formulation and not implementation of programs and projects that are devolved? And you'll find, Mr. Speaker, that the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Water and Sanitation and Irrigation would be receiving most minimal budget allocations. Yet, Mr. Speaker, they get a lion's share. Why do they do that? Because, Mr. Speaker, functions that are devolved are not being budgeted for and resourced at county levels. Instead, the money is left at the national level. The committee again recommends, Mr. Speaker, senators must be invited to ask themselves, how does a monopoly like Kenya Power be debt-ridden? How does a monopoly like Kenigen be debt-ridden? How can Kenya Power, that controls the distribution and supply of energy, electricity to Kenyans, Mr. Speaker, and dismember any supply when a citizen fails to pay for a single day, how can Kenya Power be heavily in debt, Mr. Speaker, to the extent where it is now getting the attention of the Treasurer and everybody else? It is pure and simple mismanagement. And the reforms that have been put in place in reorganizing Kenya Power, Mr. Speaker, must go further and deeper, arrest the culprits and prosecute them, and bring Kenya Power to where it was. There is not a single member in this House, Mr. Speaker, who has not fallen victim of not only the mismanagement, but the frauds being committed by Kenya Power on its consumers, where they just decide and inflate bills to recover money that they have misappropriated so that wananchi can foot and underwrite fraud. This is not acceptable, Mr. Speaker, and this House must again take a very serious view on this. Kenya Airways, Mr. Speaker, has a choking 80 billion debt. Kenyans must start asking themselves, Mr. Speaker, if this is what Kenya Airways is doing to our economy, do we still need an airline? And if we need an airline, do we need, Mr. Speaker, to own an airline that cannot generate revenue, an airline that has degenerated from the pride of Africa to the shame of Africa, Mr. Speaker? Do we really need this airline if this is what it's doing to the country? And I salute Parliament, Mr. Speaker, for the last 2 years, that both houses of Parliament resisted and rejected attempts to hand over our airports authorities to the airline that is bankrupt, so that the airline can survive on a falsehood and quicksand of money that it doesn't generate. So we need to keep asking these serious questions, that for how long will the Treasury be giving money to an airline whose only benefit to this country is unquantifiable pride? And that is all. There is nothing else we can talk about Kenya Airways, Mr. Speaker. Today, the small airlines run by entrepreneurial Kenyans at Wilson Airport, from here to Kisumu, you are paying 4,000 shillings one way 9,000 return. Kenya Airways is charging 25, 26, 29, 30,000 shillings. You go to Mombasa, same thing, Mr. Speaker. Why are they fleecing Kenyans and remaining in debt? And yet, the Treasury is still projecting that this is one of the public operations that needs to be taken into account by public coffers. This is not acceptable, and this House should take a very serious view of this, because, Mr. Speaker, there are countries that don't have an airline, and their citizens travel at will. If it is not working, let's not bother about it. If it is working, let's hold on to it. And as it is, Mr. Speaker, Kenya Airways is no longer employing Kenyans in the manner we expected. It's no longer paying Kenyans in the manner we expected. It's no longer giving Kenyans the service in the manner we expected. And it is now time to urge the national government to rethink. If you want an airline to bear Kenya's name, give it. Condition whoever invests in it to call it Kenya Airways, but let it not drain our resources that we need for other avenues of development. Mr. Speaker, the debt, the public debt, this country is suffering under very heavy public debt. This House may remember, Mr. Speaker, when Minister Ukuru Yatani came to office, he appeared before this committee and told us